Hello everyone, welcome to today's lesson on income. Right, so we're now moving on to the financial unit of this year, and it will just be 3 lessons, like the statistics unit. Right, so before we talk about budgeting and all that kind of stuff, of course, let's talk about income, man. How do we actually earn the money that we can spend in the first place? So salary is one of the most common forms of income, right? This is where you're paid over a fixed period of time. And so, for example, for us teachers, we're paid a salary. Every year, we get a set amount of money, right? And of course, when we say over a year, right, it doesn't just mean we get paid all of our money in one day, right? We usually get it paid over the course of a few months or weeks and a bunch of other time periods, right? So here's the 4 most common ones, though. Of course, there is getting paid monthly, right? So as you can imagine, there are 12 of those pay periods. Right? We can also get paid semi-monthly. Right? So just like the word semicircle, right? Semi means half. Right? Semicircle is half a circle. So semi-monthly is half of a month. Right? So in total, if you are getting paid semi-monthly, right, there are around 24 pay periods. Right? So that's every half a month. Right? So every half a month. And there's every 2 weeks. Right? So that's a little bit different. Right? Because we know weekly is 52 times. So if you get paid weekly over salary, you get paid 52 times because you have 52 weeks in a month, or 52 weeks in a year. But if you're getting paid every 2 weeks, right, if we divide 52 by 2, every 2 weeks, you're getting paid 26 times. Right? So because there isn't exactly 2 weeks or isn't exactly 4 weeks every month, we actually get paid 26 times instead of 24 times. Now, but of course, the money's the same. Right? If I have a salary of 1,000, that's not a lot. 100,000. Oh, dollars. That sounds nice. If I have a salary of 100,000, right? If I get paid monthly, yes, I will get paid more every month, but I only get paid once a month. Oh, yeah, once a month. Right? Whereas if I get paid every week, right, I get a lot less every week, but I get paid more times. But it's the same amount, 100,000 every single year. So whenever we refer to salary, we're always referring to how much you get paid in a year in total. Before taxes, of course, because that'll make our numbers sound bigger. Alright, next we have commissions. This is when we are being paid a certain percentage of total sales. Right, so you often see this in retail or car dealerships. Right, let's say for every car you sell, on top of your salary, you get like 5% of the car that's sold. Right, so that's commission. Wage is another very common one that we'll see. Right, so wage, it's very common in service industries. Right, right, because in those kind of industries, we don't really have a set amount of days every single year. Right, oftentimes, uh, places that pay wages is more so when they give you the schedule on the fly. Because if you don't know how many hours you're working each year, it's easier just to pay you how many hours that you have worked. Right, so generally, it's around 7 to 10 hours a day, or around 35 to 40 hours a week. Anything past that's overtime. It's more pay. Right, and overtime pay, it's usually 1.5 times the original pay amount. So if you're getting paid $20 an hour, overtime pay is 20 times 1.5, which is $30 an hour. Right? Sometimes you can even get 2 times pay, or even 3 times pay. Right? A lot of professions, like nurses, have really good overtime pay and holiday pay. Right? But for us teachers, we may not get holiday pay over the summer breaks, but summer breaks is kind of nice. Okay. Next is get piecework. Right. So this is getting paid a fixed rate, or more specifically, call that a fixed piece rate for each unit produced. Right? And many times it's on top of your salary. So let's say you earn 100K in salary, and then you also get what do you do? 100K in salary making shoelaces. Oh, making aglets. That's the end of a shoelace. Making aglets in a factory. For every aglet you make, you get $1 on top of that. Right? So that's gonna be piecework. So 100K plus every single aglet that you make in $1 each. Okay, so let's do some calculations here. Right, so let's say someone has a salary of 42,600, or more importantly, annual salary. Annual means once a year. Annual salary of 42K600, and it is paid every week. And her work week is 40 hours. So, how much is she earning every week? Right? Because we know, right, that's a salary of 42,600, and that's paid every week. We know there are 52 weeks in a year. So all we have to do is to simply divide it by 52. Right, so I will say all the calculations when it comes to finances isn't super difficult. It's just knowing how to set the equations up. Which is, let's be honest, that's most of math anyways. Okay, and how about her hourly rate? Right, we know that she earns around 820 every week. And she works 40 hours every week. So to find her hourly rate, we can just divide how much she earns in a week, divide that by 40, because that's how many hours she worked every week. She get $20.48 per hour. As of recording, that is above minimum wage, but we'll see what happens when you watch this video. Hopefully a lot higher than this. Okay, so now, if the hourly rate is 1.5 times, or sorry, the overtime hourly rate is 1.5 times the regular hourly pay rate, so like the standard 1.5 times. What does she make working 8 hours overtime during 1 week? Right, so we can find her overtime pay first. Right, because because she worked an extra 8 hours, we need to find the overtime pay of 1 hour, and then we can multiply that by 8. Right, so the overtime pay is 20.48, that's her hourly rate, times 1.5, right, 1.5 times. That gets us $30.72. Okay, so the total weekly, or for that specific week where she worked 8 hours overtime, is 819, right? So that's her default money earned per week, right? And that, oh, not times, that'd be kind of nice actually. Plus 30.72 times 8, right? Because that's her overtime pay, and then she worked 8 of those overtime hours. Right, order of operation, we multiply first, of course, and then we add. So in 1 week, with overtime, she earns around 1,000, which is pretty good. Like, overtime pay is fantastic, but also we have to work 8 more hours. Okay? Next, we got Zelda here, who works in the Asian Technology Research Lab. She receives a weekly base salary of 420. Okay, so it's weekly. Oops, it's covered here by my camera again. Right, it is her weekly salary, which is again $420 every week, and a commission of 75% on the weekly sales over 5,500. Right, so she gets that extra commission fee only if the sales are above 5,500. And now she had sales of 7,200. Hopefully you can just see it. I need to like zoom out enough that's not being blocked by my fat head. Right. If she had sales of 7,250 in a week, what's her income for that week? Right, so here's the important information we know. Right, the commission is only if, or it's only on the sales that's over 5,500. Right, so if she had sales for 7,250, so then she earns a commission. That also asked me a commission has 2 M's. Right, the commission then is on 7,250 subtracted by 5500. Alright, so this is how much commission she's actually earning. Right, because again, it's only on sales over 5,500. And the sales over 5,500 is her total, subtract her required amount, right? Which is 1,750. Okay, and then from there, right, now we can find the commission that she gets paid for that 1,750. So commission earned. I want to multiply that by 7.5%. And as we remember, 7.5% is the same thing as 7.5 divided by 100. Right? And to divide that by 100, we move the decimal places by 2, because it's 2 zeros, 1, 2. Right, so as a decimal is 0.075. So she earns 131.25 for her commission, because that's 7.5%. Right, and then from there, you add them up. So her weekly salary is 420, and her commissions that week is 131. Right, so that's why you oftentimes see retail workers and car dealers be very pushy about trying to make sales, right? Because most of the time they get a commission on the things they actually manage to sell. Right, and usually it works for everyone involved, right? You get something that you will like, and they earn a nice little commission out of it. Okay, next, we got Alright, next we got Mr. C here again. Alright, I used to work at Kumon. It's a math tutoring center. Of course I did that. And now my regular work week is, let's say, 40 hours. That's a lot. I was a high schooler, so I only worked part-time. But let's just say I worked 40 hours with an hourly wage of $20.65 and time and a half for overtime. Right, so working 40 hours a week, which is full-time, and the hourly rate is $20.65, and the regular time and a half times for overtime pay. Right, so if I worked 44.5 hours the last week, how much money did I earn? Right, so once again, we find the overtime first. Right, because I worked 44.5 hours, and I usually work 40 hours, that means we can subtract them to get that I worked 4.5 hours overtime. Right, and now the overtime pay, right, is 20.65 times 1.5, right? That's my regular overtime pay, the time and a half, times 4.5 hours, because that's how many hours I worked. So in total, I earned an extra 139.39 cents. And of course, the total, we just add them up. My normal hours is 40 hours times 20.65. Right, I worked 40 hours is a pay of this. Now add my overtime hours. 965.39. Okay. Okay, so next. So one of the stages of making a part cut is installing the zipper. Alright, so let's say a seamstress needs 20 minutes on average to sew a zipper onto a part cut. And that seamstress gets paid $6.20 per zipper. So now from here, what's the weekly pay if she has a 35-hour work week? Okay, so she works 35 hours every week, right? And again, reasonable assumption that it is an 8-hour. She works for 8 hours, but takes a 1-hour lunch break. Right, so it's 7 times 5, 35-hour work week. And we know that she takes 20 minutes on average to sew a zipper. And we know that she earns $6.20 for every zipper. So so we can just say, oh, if that's the case, she gets $6.20 every 20 minutes. Okay, and we know that she works 35 hours every week. So the first step is to find how many zippers can she make in a week. Right, and to do that, we know it's 20 minutes per zipper. So let's find the minutes of a week first. Right, we know that it is 60 minutes per hour, and she works 35 hours. So it's 2,100 minutes. Well, there's not 2,100 minutes in a week, but it's 2,100 minutes in the week that she works. Okay? Or 2,100 minutes worked every week. There we go, that sounds a lot better. Okay, and from there, we can find how many zippers per week. Right, we know it's 20 minutes per zipper. Now 2,100 divided by 20, that's 105 zippers. So that's a lot of zippers. Now that's at least 12 zippers. Okay, and then from there, last step. So the easiest step. 105 zippers. She earns $6.20 per zipper. That's 651 bucks per week. Right, so yeah, so that's all the types. Right, so we got. Right, so yeah, we got salary. Right, we got commission here. We got hourly wage, and then we got piecework here. Okay, so now let's say we have good old Greg here who earns $225.75 per week, which you got a pretty good chance that Greg is a high schooler working part-time, right? Right, so now we're saying how much does he make in a month? Right, so that's our first question. Of course, it's each week, and we're asking for in a month. Right, so we know this to be specific. Right, if we want to be specific, there is around 4.3 weeks every month. Right, but to be honest, you can just use 4 if you want. Okay, because there's around 4 weeks in a month, and because you get paid, if you get paid every 4 weeks, you get paid every 28 days, which is only a perfect number in on February, so that's not a leap year. So yeah, 4.3 doesn't make too much sense, but it's the most precise one. But again, you can just use 4 if you want. It's around the same anyways. So times 4.3, Greg earns 970 bucks-ish. What did I say? You can use 4 here. Okay, and from here, we're saying that he wants to save 20% of his pay every week. How much money would he save in a year? Okay, let's check it out. So he earns this much a week. He saves 20% of that, which is 0.2, right? So 20 is just 20% is 20 divided by 100. And there are 12 months in a year. Right? Or alternatively, you can also do 225.75 times 20% of that times 52 weeks. Right? Again, the answers will be around the same. Right? And if we, I should probably move this guy so it's not. Right? So 20 divided by 100 here. 52 weeks. 52 weeks. Right, okay. And then from there, right, he earns, or not earns, but he saved 2,347.8. Right, so that's how much he ends up saving up. Okay, yeah, so that's pretty much it for this lesson, right? So we just pretty much learned the four most common ways that we earn money. Of course, there's some odd ones as well, right? Because again, I think there's, especially with the rise of influencers, there's, what is it? Money per click. There's probably a better way for money click click, money per view, but you get money based on how many views you get and that kind of stuff, right? Which is actually kind of similar to commission, right? Where for how many, every 1,000 views you get like $1, right? But yeah, there's different types of pay, but those four are the most common ones. But with that being said, that's it for today's lesson. So good luck practicing.